Roy Rogers' wife dies of heart failure. 3 years after he revealed his secret, guilty. Roy Rogers was born on November 5, 1911 in Cincinnati, Ohio, to Andrew and Mattie Sly, a hard-working couple whose dreams stretched far beyond the limits of their modest circumstances. His father, Andrew, had grown increasingly frustrated with city life. The long hours, the noise, the gritty industrial environment, and the feeling that he could never quite get ahead no matter how hard he worked. Determined to break free from the monotony and strain of his urban job, Andrew teamed up with his brother to build an actual houseboat. It was a bold and unusual choice, but it reflected the Sly family's deep-rooted desire for independence and adventure. Once the houseboat was complete, they set off up the Ohio River toward Portsmouth, hoping for a simpler, more fulfilling life outside the city's pressures. When the Great Flood of 1913 devastated large parts of Ohio, the Sly family realized how vulnerable life on the river could be, especially with young children. Seeking stability, they bought a plot of land in Portsmouth and pulled the houseboat ashore, anchoring it on the property as their home. Andrew tried his hand at farming first, putting his hopes into the soil with the same grit he took to every task. But when farming failed to consistently support the family, he shifted to working at a local shoe factory. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. And steady was exactly what the family needed to survive. Roy attended school in the small community of McDermott, Ohio, where he developed a deep love for the outdoors and the rural lifestyle. He wasn't particularly fond of school, but he was a friendly, energetic kid with a strong work ethic and a growing interest in music. When he turned 17, the family returned to Cincinnati, and the realities of adulthood came fast. Roy dropped out of school mid-year so he could work alongside his father at the shoe factory, helping support the family during lean times. Eventually, the Slys moved to California, chasing the promise of new beginnings. Roy and his father took jobs as truck drivers, settling into a tiny house near Roy's sister Mary and her husband. Life was tough but manageable, until the Great Depression hit in 1930 and wiped out nearly everything they had. Suddenly unemployed and with no safety net, Roy found himself drifting between grim worker campsites, scraping by on whatever day labor he could find. These were bleak, hungry years, but also defining ones. It was during this period of hardship that Roy discovered a powerful escape: music. He picked up a guitar, began teaching himself chords, and realized he had a natural talent for singing. A warm, steady voice that carried both joy and sorrow. One night, he finally confessed to his father that he didn't want a life in factories or fields. He wanted to make music for a living. With a mix of courage and desperation, he set out for Los Angeles alongside his cousin, Stanley Sly. The two performed together under the name the Sly Brothers, doing small gigs wherever people would listen. By 1932, Roy's musical journey leveled up when he signed on for a tour with the O Cowboys. They performed across the Southwest, including live gigs on a New Mexico radio station that helped him develop confidence behind a microphone. Over the next few years, Roy joined forces with a Western-style cowboy music group, and with them he helped form what would eventually become one of the most iconic harmony groups in the genre, the Sons of the Pioneers. Throughout 1934, the Sons of the Pioneers released a string of hits that made them a national sensation. Songs like Cool Water and Tumbling Tumbleweeds showcased their tight harmonies and poetic evocation of Western landscapes. Roy, with his easygoing charm and resonant singing voice, quickly became one of the group's standout performers. As success grew, Hollywood took notice. By 1935, Roy began appearing in films, usually as a singing cowboy, in movies such as Slightly Static and The Old Homestead, slowly building his presence on screen. In 1938, he officially adopted the screen name Roy Rogers, a name that sounded friendly, confident, and cowboy-ready, exactly the image the studios wanted. Not long afterward, fate gave him a massive break. He was chosen to replace Gene Autry, one of the biggest Western stars of the time, who was in a contract dispute. Roy stepped into the spotlight with films like Under Western Stars and Billy the Kid Returns, immediately winning over audiences with his wholesome smile and natural charisma. The year 1939 became a whirlwind of success. He starred in hit after hit, including Rough Riders Roundup, Southward Ho, Frontier Pony Express, In Old Caliente, Wall Street Cowboy, The Arizona Kid, Jeepers Creepers, Saga of Death Valley, and Days of Jesse James. His popularity exploded, making him one of the most recognizable cowboy figures of the era. Roy cemented his box office status in 1940 when he appeared in Dark Command, a major John Wayne film. Even in a supporting role, he stole scenes and further elevated his image as one of Hollywood's most dependable Western stars. That same year brought more successful films like Young Buffalo Bill and Colorado, solidifying his unstoppable rise. From 1939 to 1954, an astonishing 15 consecutive years, Roy Rogers ranked in the Motion Picture Herald's Top 10 Money-Making Western Stars poll. During this prolific stretch, he delivered countless beloved films, including classics such as King of the Cowboys and Song of Nevada, each one adding to his mythic cowboy persona. Then came television, which made Roy Rogers an even bigger household name. The Roy Rogers Show, which aired from 1951 to 1957, featured Roy as a warm, justice-loving ranch owner. He starred alongside his wife Dale Evans and the loyal Pat Brady, as well as his iconic horse Trigger and faithful dog Bullet, who became stars in their own right. The show mixed adventure, music, and feel-good storytelling, becoming a staple in American living rooms. As Roy's popularity with children skyrocketed, he smartly secured the rights to his name and likeness, a move far ahead of its time. This allowed him to launch a wave of Roy Rogers merchandise. Action figures, comic books, adventure novels, lunchboxes, and countless cowboy-themed toys. Kids everywhere wanted to be like the king of the cowboys, and Rogers' face was suddenly everywhere. In 1962, Roy and Dale attempted to recapture some of that magic on television with a new comedy Western variety series, The Roy Rogers and Dale Evans Show. The show launched with strong enthusiasm, thanks to their legendary status and built-in fan base. But despite the promising start, ratings declined steadily after the first 3 months. Faced with a competitive TV landscape and shifting viewer tastes, the network pulled the plug, bringing the show to an abrupt end. Roy Rogers' personal life was shaped in profound ways by the 2 women he married, each representing a distinct era of his emotional journey and his evolution as a man. His first marriage was to Grace Arlene Wilkins, whom he married in 1936, long before he became the king of the cowboys. And a household name, Grace wasn't just a wife, she was part of his foundational years, back when he was still fighting for stability and working relentlessly to turn his talent into a real career. She stood with him through the lean, uncertain times when gigs were inconsistent and fame was still far beyond the horizon. Their marriage marked a period when Rogers was honing his craft, experimenting with group performances, exploring opportunities in the Sons of the Pioneers, and dreaming of something bigger even when nothing was guaranteed. Grace and Roy built a life centered on quiet loyalty and mutual trust, and they also built a family together. They adopted a daughter, Cheryl, in 1941, and Grace later gave birth to their biological child, Linda Lou, in 1943. These early family experiences helped shape Rogers' spirit into the patient, paternal figure the world later saw in his films and television shows. But their time together was heartbreakingly short. In 1946, Grace tragically passed away due to complications from childbirth with their son, Roy Jr., known as Dusty. Her death hit Roy with a force he rarely spoke about publicly, a wound that stayed with him for the rest of his life. Losing Grace at such a young age, and at a moment that should have been filled with joy, carved into him a deep sense of vulnerability and grief. It left him a single father with 3 children, trying to carry on while still showing the world his familiar calm smile. Friends later said he carried a quiet sorrow whenever he talked about her, a reminder of the fragile balance between love and loss that defined so much of early adulthood for him. A year later, in 1947, Roy married Dale Evans, a partnership that not only reshaped his personal life, but transformed his professional destiny as well. Dale wasn't just a wife. She became his lifelong co-star, creative partner, soulmate, and the other half of the iconic cowboy couple America adored for decades. Their chemistry was undeniable from the first time they worked together. She was sharp, confident, musically gifted, and radiated warmth, qualities that matched Roy's gentle steadiness in a way that felt almost designed. Together, they built an entire entertainment brand: films, radio shows, TV programs, books, music recordings, and even an image of moral clarity that became beloved in households across America. Beyond their public success, Roy and Dale forged a deeply meaningful home life rooted in compassion. They adopted multiple children, many of whom had disabilities or came from difficult backgrounds. Their home was famously described as a small, busy universe of second chances, and they saw parenting not as a duty, but as a calling. After the death of their daughter Robin, born with Down syndrome, Dale wrote Angel Unaware, a book that became hugely influential for families raising children with disabilities. This era of Roy's life, the decades with Dale, became the emotional counterbalance to the pain he endured after losing Grace. Dale brought him a sense of shared purpose and spiritual grounding, and Roy himself credited her with helping him find new meaning in his life. Both as a public figure and as a man, quietly carrying old wounds, Rogers died of congestive heart failure on July 6, 1998, in Apple Valley, California. He was buried at Sunset Hills Memorial Park, a quiet place surrounded by desert skies and the open spaces he loved. 3 years later, his wife, Dale Evans, was laid to rest beside him, completing a partnership that had weathered triumphs, heartbreaks, and decades of public admiration. Roy Rogers hid his illness for as long as he could. He had always worn the image of the king of the cowboys, strong, upright, always steady in the saddle, and the idea of revealing weakness frightened him more than the illness itself. "I didn't want anyone worrying about me," he once said, a confession laced with regret. The guilt he carried came not only from being sick, but from the weight of years spent putting work, expectations, and a carefully crafted public persona above his own needs. He often regretted the lost opportunities with his family. The quiet dinners he missed, the vacations he postponed, the little ordinary moments he knew Dale and the children treasured. Fame gave him everything and took just as much, and he felt that imbalance in his final years. Dale Evans eventually discovered the truth about Roy's declining health long before he was willing to speak openly about it. She knew her husband well enough to see through his brave front. To her, the secrecy was painful. Not because he hid the illness, but because it revealed how heavy his burdens had become. Dale often said in her later interviews that Roy carried responsibilities bigger than any cowboy saddle, and that she wished he had allowed himself to lean on her more. Still, she stood beside him, as she always had, through every hospital visit, every difficult night, every quiet moment when he let his guard down. Dale Evans was Roy Rogers' second wife, his partner in both life and show business, and the woman who understood him more deeply than anyone else. After Roy's death, Dale endured 3 years of profound grief. She had already known heartbreak, the loss of several children over the years, tragedies that cut deeper than any headline ever revealed. And Roy's death reopened every old wound. She felt the drop-off in her own health soon after he passed. The exhaustion of caregiving, the emotional weight of losing a lifelong partner, and the loneliness of returning to an empty home took a toll she could not fully recover from. By the time she herself suffered congestive heart failure, Dale had lived a lifetime of both public cheer and private sorrow. For her, the greatest pain was always tied to loss: the loss of her daughter Robin, the loss of her adopted son, and finally, the loss of Roy, the man she walked beside through every chapter of her life. Even near the end, she spoke of him with a soft, enduring affection, saying, "Roy was my strength, and I was his. We held each other up." Their story remains one of Hollywood's most iconic partnerships, not because it was perfect, but because it was profoundly human. Two people, beloved by millions, facing illness, regret, love, grief, and the quiet determination to stay standing together until the very last possible day.